Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the C-Man, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the C-Man's Cinema Sit-Down. I got one of my red Spidey, I think this is like a No Way Home Multiverse Spider-Man shirt from New Rockstars, but the coloration, because he's like all kind of grayish dark black and there's like red in there, kind of reminded me of the spider suit that we see in this movie, which I had no intention of talking about at length because I didn't really enjoy it that much. However, some of my interactions with people this week and some of the things that I've just seen in like people swinging the opposite way on this movie and trying to say like it's not that bad, and look, I get it, movies are subjective, and you know, people, every movie is not for every person, but every movie has an audience, you know what I mean? And that's fine, but I feel like there's some people that swung so hard in the opposite because of all the hate coming out for this movie. Like, you're not just... this is the thing, I struggle when people don't recognize good things in bad movies and don't recognize things that are technically bad in movies that they enjoy. And that creates a lot of the kind of stuff that we see online. What am I talking about? Why don't you pull up a chair, take a seat? We are getting ready to dive in. Spoiler! Filled, because I feel like you got to talk about some of the stuff that happens in this movie directly, but we're going to dive in spoiler filled into Madam Web. And first and foremost, I am not someone who likes to crap on movies and really be vitriolic when it comes to this stuff. Movies are here to entertain us. Typically I am entertained and I get so much enjoyment out of movies, and so many people work on a film. It feels wrong to just blatantly be like, this movie sucked or this movie was terrible, because not everyone, when they're working, knows what the final product is going to look like. And you'll see that sometimes with actors where they're like, that's not the movie that I was acting in. And it's one of these things where there are multiple things going on. And, you know, Chris Stuckman talked about this a little bit, and I can appreciate some of his views, specifically, you know, coming from somebody who's trying to work in the industry and be a filmmaker. And I'd love one day to, you know, get my script finished and get a movie made. You never know who you might cross paths with or whose bridges you might burn if you say something wrong. But if you're also going to live in the review space like myself, I think you just got to talk about these things in a non-vitriolic way and just kind of talk about what went right and what went wrong. And unfortunately for this movie, a lot of things went wrong. And yes, it does feel like there could be some studio meddling in this one. There were rumors that Ben and Mary Parker and Peter were going to have a bigger role to play in the story than what they ultimately get. And when you watch the movie knowing that, you can kind of see some of the editing that feels off is probably cutting around or cutting stuff out that was there in this story that maybe involved them more. But at the same time, you also got to hold people accountable for things that don't work or just aren't very good from just a technical, factual basis. That being said, walking out of the movie, I only had one thing. You know, someone was like, is there nothing redeemable in this movie? I was like, well, there's one thing that I kind of did enjoy about this movie. But in thinking a little bit more, there's one other person that I think deserves some credit, and one person that, like, I just feel like I can't put in the bad because they're barely in the movie. And what they did was fine. But there are three performances, two in particular, that I think are good to decent. I thought Adam Scott as Ben Parker was fantastic. I would take him as young Ben Parker in any iteration of a movie that you want to do. I think Adam Scott is really talented and shows you that he is somebody, if you put him in something somewhere, he will make the best of what's given to him, and if he has to elevate stuff, he'll elevate it. The problem is everything else going around Ben wasn't that great, that it was hard for Scott to elevate this in any way. And he's not in the movie enough to really have a direct impact. But in what we got, I was like, I would watch young Ben Parker be a paramedic because I thought Adam Scott was great. I also thought Isabela Merced was pretty good playing Anya Corazon. Of the three girls, I thought she did the most with what she was given, felt the most at least in tune to the character portrayal she was being given to do. And she doesn't have a ton to do in this movie, which is a problem because her as well as the other two girls, and even Dakota Johnson at times, I'm just like, it doesn't feel like anybody's doing anything in this movie or doesn't have a lot to chew on. But I did think she kind of delivered a little bit stronger in that group of three. She, I think, was the strongest. And then Emma Roberts, I just think you got to kind of give her a pass because it seems like she's been completely cut out of the movie. But, you know, I love Emma Roberts. She's always, I think, pretty good. And when she pops up in the things because I'm a fan, and she did what she could with this one, but there really wasn't anything for her to do because she is stripped completely out of the movie, and so is Peter. They don't even say Peter's name. This like some of the bad writing, like there was a whole bit where they were going to try to guess the name of Peter, and Cassie gets a vision where they almost say it, so like you're expecting her to come in and like win the game, be like, oh, it's Peter, and then that doesn't even happen. You end up getting this horrible bit where she starts, somebody asks her something, and it was like, oh, my mom died in childbirth, and now you're at a like baby shower talking about like childbirth deaths. It gets so cringe and awkward, like it's just bad. You know what I mean? But anyway, I digress. We're going to talk about the writing in a little bit. But there were also some okay things in this. Surprisingly, I was kind of not impressed by Dakota Johnson or Sydney Sweeney in this movie. And these are two people who I have seen be really good at things in movies and have roles that really work in the past where there's talent there. And I think it really just speaks for me, while I don't necessarily think they're looking to elevate things in what they're doing on screen, it feels like the writing and what they're given is not enough for them to do very much. And I genuinely think that they try. And the problem, I think, maybe comes from some of the direction that they're being given, because Dakota Johnson, her deadpan delivery just comes off as disinterestedness. And when you see things like what's gone on in the press tour, I mean, she was interviewed by Josh Horowitz, and he asked her, like, can you name the 3 Spider-Man movies? And she couldn't. She was like, Spider-Man arrives, Spider-Man comes back, and Spider-Man comes back again, something like that. And when you count that type of stuff into what her performance is, it feels kind of disinterested, which isn't a great thing. And more than anything, though, I do think that's coming from the direction she's being given and the really weak script that she has. I feel the same way with Sydney Sweeney. Actually, I kind of feel like Sweeney's miscast here. I think Sweeney is really good when you're looking for a bombshell, or if you're looking to go down some darker paths. Some of the stuff I've seen Sweeney do, it gets a little bit darker. She's actually quite compelling sometimes. And here, she's never compelling. She almost comes off like she's not even trying to act well. And Julia Cornwall just doesn't feel right. Like she's playing this shy, innocent, kind of introverted girl who just wants to follow the rules. Yet, when you end up in a diner and a bunch of boys are looking at you, and Maddie Franklin can like slut up your outfit a little bit, it just felt like conflicting visions. You know what I mean? And I wasn't buying the character that she was trying to sell. And I think that can make it kind of come off like a bad performance because it doesn't feel natural. What she's doing just didn't click. And again, I don't think that's so much as Sweeney doing a poor job as what she's been given to do and what she's being asked to do doesn't quite fit. What I will say, and I wonder if this was part of the casting, in the suit, in the minuscule seconds that we get of it, she looks fantastic. And that version of Julia, I think maybe could have worked and Sweeney could have found some stuff. But what we get here with this high school version of Julia, it didn't click. And I felt the same way with Celeste O'Connor's Maddie Franklin. Again, not given a ton to do, but what she is given to do, I think sometimes she overacts. It feels at times like she maybe feels like she's in a movie that she's not actually. Like she feels like she's coming from a different movie altogether when she's on screen, and it really kind of breaks up the tone and makes it kind of jarring at times because she's just dialed up a little too much for me. And I think she's also the least experienced in this group, and I think that kind of comes off at times. And, the other thing that doesn't help her in any way is she's kind of the ringleader in the dumbest thing that the girls do in the entire film, and she's also at the center of the second idiotic thing that they do. And that, that's the diner scene. She convinces Julia to dance on this table, which leads them being seen and then getting almost caught again. And then when they're at home with Ben, Mary goes into labor, and they all leave. And who's looking out the window, even though they all got hoods up? It's Maddie, and her face is on a camera. And then Ezekiel is able to find them again. So I think those things, like it's just right out the gate, like your main core of characters, they're either not getting enough to do, or what they're getting to do isn't all that good, and that leads me to the bad in this movie. And look, like I said, I think at some point there'll be a story about what happened with this movie, what happened to the original script and the original story, and things changed. It definitely feels like things were changing in real time. It definitely feels like the studio was being involved, maybe a little bit more than they should have. However, you watch sports, owners get involved, they do things that set the team up to not do great things, but it's the head coach's job to figure out how to work past that stuff to deliver, good things for the team and a good product on the field or the court or wherever you are, right? And that's how I kind of feel with S.J. Clarkson here. She's the director. She's the head coach. And yes, you're going to be given, sometimes some tough things, especially in a studio movie when they can be very, very involved and kind of force your hand at times. And Clarkson, to her credit, this is her first film. Maybe she wasn't ready to be in this type of environment. But she doesn't do anything to elevate the material. And I've said this with some of the acting and the performances, but that's this movie's problem, is it doesn't feel like there's anybody trying to elevate the crap that they were given on the page. My biggest issue with this movie is the script. We'll get there. But from Clarkson's standpoint, look, she does do some okay things. She's been, she's directed a couple episodes of Jessica Jones. Ironically, a lot of Jessica Jones vibes are present here in this movie, the way that Cassie looks. There's a train sequence that feels like it was ripped right out of Jessica Jones. There's elements of what they're doing with Zeke that kind of feels like what you got with the villain there. So that stuff's kind of weird, but she also did some Defender stuff. She's done all television things in general, but she does have a couple cool moments. The train sequence in particular, when they're on the train, was one of the rare spots where I kind of felt like things were sort of working, even though the schizo-type edits going in and out of Cassie's visions are rough, and they're hard to get through. The stuff that was happening on the train didn't feel as jarring and kind of felt like you could see she was seeing what's happening to all these girls. And then they get off the train, and then it kind of gets away from them. But there was a couple nice, when Zeke is climbing up on walls and moving around, there's a couple nice camera spins. And then there are other times, though, where the camera is doing things where it's like it's doing too much. Sit back, don't do as much. Stay still, don't cut around so much. Again, the editing in this movie is rough. But, I didn't feel at any point like you had a director who was completely incompetent doing things, right? She did the best that she could to put together something with what you had. But my thing with her is just, it's she never elevates anything. And even if the studio is bullying you or getting involved and making you do things you don't want to do, you still have to find ways to engage your audience. And there's nothing ever engaging happening in this movie, at least for me. And the other thing too, and this I think is less about Clarkson herself and more about when you're looking at the people you're picking for these types of films, doesn't have the best track record per se as of late, right? She had a Star Trek movie that she was supposed to direct, completely fell apart. The rumors were that there were contract disputes for Chris Pine, who's very important to that series, and Chris Hemsworth, who was supposed to be coming back for that movie. But Hemsworth said it was the script issues that kind of made him leave. Regardless, a movie that doesn't work out. You shoot a pilot for Game of Thrones spinoff with Naomi Watts, and it never sees the light of day. To have a failed pilot and have these are things that I think if you're Sony, you got to be aware of. You know what I mean? And you have to bring in people that are willing to learn and dive in and get into the material. And that's the other thing. I don't think any of the actors, I don't think Clarkson, certainly none of the other two writers in this movie, it doesn't feel like they've ever read a comic book or that they understand who these characters are or where they come from or how they could function together, even if you're doing something that's out of the norm. One of the early problems I thought this movie was kind of bumping into for me right away was wait, I'm going to have these 3 Spider Women in a movie that's set in the before Peter even exists. That's kind of weird. And then it ends up being a Vision. And you're like, okay, they didn't botch that one. But they also didn't know how to play with these toys at all. And that's one, again, kind of comes back to the leadership, where it's if you're the director, if the studio isn't telling you, Kevin Feige comes in and is hey, you got to read all these comics, you got to do this, you got to do that. It should be Clarkson's job to make sure, hey, if Do you guys read some comics? Do you know these characters in and out? Do you understand where they're coming from? Do you understand the franchise for when you're getting ready to do like press rounds? Like, it doesn't feel like any of that stuff was there. And then the big thing for me is like, if you're gonna do a comic book movie, I need comic book action, and there's no comic book action in this movie, and that stems from a couple places, right? One, almost all the action that's in this movie, you've seen it in the trailers already. Two, the concept of this film in general kind of prevents you from being able to do actiony things because you have a super powered villain on the physical end, and you have your hero who has superpowers that she hasn't quite developed or understood yet, but it's all mental, type stuff. It's not physical. So she can't really fight Zeke. The girls, like I said, they're only spider people in this vision that Zeke has. They're just teenage girls here. They can't fight Zeke. So you can't have any kind of confrontations unless it's them running away or hitting Zeke with cars. Dakota Johnson hits him with a cab at the diner and then hits him with an ambulance when they're in the city. And it's just like, you just sit there. It's the design of the movie itself doesn't set it up to do things. And I heard somebody mention like it could have gone like kind of had like horror vibes sometimes when Zeke was moving in the visions, right? Like when you see him killing and doing stuff. And it's like, you know what? That's actually a good point. You could have gone down the route of more of like a horror thriller, right? But if you're gonna do that, you gotta lean all the way into that genre and really make that stuff pop to engage your audience. They don't. This movie feels like it should be a comic book movie. But then you don't get any of the comic book type stuff that you're going to see. And then even when you do finally get some big action, right? Cassie's figured out how to use her powers sort of a little bit better. So and you're wrapping up to the end of the movie. You got this finale. All you got to do is just coordinate one sequence. That's kind of cool. And this finale sequence is a complete disaster. Visual effects are not great. The sign, the S from the Pepsi sign, which, by the way, I haven't seen this much forced. Like, here's a sponsor in your face, like there's so much Pepsi stuff going on in this movie. And yes, the Pepsi, sign on this building is super iconic in New York. I get that, but like, it felt like Pepsi was sponsoring this movie. Anyway, but you get to, this whole thing where like this S is gonna fall on Zeke, and the visual effects of it falling on him and then sitting there didn't look right. What's happening in general in this scene is crazy. You go back to a building that was on fire earlier in the movie that Cassie shows up to do paramedic things for. You would think she disappears and goes to Peru for a week at one point during this movie. You'd think in a week, you'd clear out, make this not a dangerous place. Nah, it's still ready to blow. And then when you get in there and Cassie and the girls start setting off all the fireworks to try to fight Zeke, because, physically they can't do anything, it just didn't look good. Silly things happen. A firework hits a wall and knocks out a perfect human-sized hole to walk through. I don't think fireworks have that kind of power. And if they did, imagine a small hole that you got to kind of push through. The actual end of it itself, Cassie is on this thing and Zeke is chasing her, and she knows that the S is going to fall. She's constantly looking at the S. Let me move. Nope, I got to move more so to get Zeke in the right spot. If I'm Zeke and I see her looking at the S, not looking at me, I'm going to be like, what is she looking at? You know what I mean? And like, it's just things like that make this movie not work. And same thing, like to not have the girls in the suits. I've heard some people, you got catfish. No, like the movie never says that it's gonna be them doing these things or whatever. So like, I didn't feel that, but like, it's just a wasted opportunity. If you're gonna make a freaking movie that doesn't feel like it ties to anything, it would have been more helpful to have the girls have the powers and and then you could have gotten some comic book action, and I'd be like, well, it's not the comic books, but at least you did this or this. And it's just all of it, specifically on the action side, just kind of falls apart. And then you get to the script, and this script is just bad, man. It's not well put together. It does things at times that aren't logical, but are done only to serve certain things later on in the movie, right? So there's, at the very beginning when you're getting off the train, Sydney Sweeney's character yells, hey, we're being kidnapped. And Cassie is wanted for abduction of these 3 girls, all over the news. steals a cab, takes the license plates off of it, continues to drive the cab around all over the place, never gets caught, never even any confrontation. She shows up at the diner when Zeke is coming. The girls have decided to dance on the table, and now, it's one of these where she, crashes into the diner to hit Zeke. No repercussions from that. And the whole abduction thing, right? It never is a beat after that train until you get to the diner. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, they've exposed themselves. They're dancing on this table. This guy's reading the paper. Oh, here are these 3 images. Oh, those are those 3 girls. Let me call the police. And then because you gave Zeke future NSA stuff, his number 2 is like, oh, here comes the call. We know right where the girls are. The only reason the abduction thing, so that could happen. It's almost as dumb as the girls, just constantly not staying put or being in a place that's safe and staying there. Just stuff from inside the script in and of itself makes no sense. The dialogue in this movie is so stiff. And it's just not very good, to the point where, like I said, the actors delivering it can't really do a lot with what's there on the dialogue side. And you see stuff like that, the fact that they butcher Zeke's character completely, right? Like I said, nobody did any homework. Zeke's not a villain in the comics. He's kind of a bad guy sometimes, but also does some not bad things, and has been able to help Peter at times because he's had these powers for so long, and he understands all of these animal totems, which was something that I thought we might get into, because that could tie you into Kraven and some of the other things, but no, we don't go that route. And just the decision they make with Zeke's character to kill these 3 girls as the solution to him avoiding his future death puts you in a spot where 20 minutes in, you're like, all right, well, we're going to have to kill Zeke off because that's the only way you're getting out of this. And then that's the waste of a character that could be really interesting. And then let alone, that's not something that the character would do. There's a story where he's going to sacrifice Peter to a giant spider to gain more power for himself. And when he starts to have the realization that Peter is good and Spider-Man represents good things, he doesn't let that happen. And there's no self-actualization. He can't see any of that stuff in this movie whatsoever, and that just it hurts it so much. And even Cassie, it feels like, I said this with the Black Adam movie, right? It's like, oh, The Rock read Wikipedia and took a bunch of things from Black Adam's story to create what you got on screen, but it didn't feel like it was authentic to the comics. And I get that way here with Madam Web. It's like, oh, okay, and Zeke, oh, okay, premonitions, cool. This is the villain we can use because he can have premonitions. Oh, Madam Web, she has astral projecting powers. As far as I know, astral projection can't be a physical thing, yet somehow she, at the end of the movie, astrally projects herself into 3 places to save all 3 girls physically at one time. And when it happened, 1, it didn't look great. 2, I was just like, this feels so weird because it's not coming out of comic books. I mean, I could be wrong, but I've never seen Madam Web do anything like that in the comics. She's used astral projection, but usually it's to warn people of things that are happening or coming. So to see that, it just came off weird because it didn't feel like it was earned, and all of a sudden it was like Cassie could barely do anything, to now she can be like, oh, duck, or do this because she can see things. Now all of a sudden she's astrally projecting herself, and that's the other thing too with this movie is it takes too long to get there. If you're gonna do this as a movie, you got to consolidate those first 2 acts down so that you can get Webb to Peru earlier, so she's starting to understand her powers, so that by the time you get to the 3rd act, she's in full command of them in some way where she can fight with Zeke. You could do something that looks comic booky, and then that actually could be something that's cool for a telepath or a psychic powered superhero, right? To be able to project in 3 places and do things, it could have felt earned, but it never does. And this is one of those where, whether it's the story, whether it's decision making for the characters, the girls making these stupid choices to constantly get themselves in scenarios where they can get caught by Zeke, to this movie feeling like its only purpose is to introduce these characters so that you can play with them maybe somewhere down the line if you do a live-action Spider-Verse movie. That was what my takeaway was coming out of the movie, and that's something where if you're Sony, you got to look at these things. And my guess is that, yeah, these are the guys who did Morbius. I'm guessing that these are guys that can turn scripts around quick and They aren't super expensive, but like at the same time, when you're playing in fandom places like this that have fans that are so tied to the material and know everything so well, Matt Sazama and Burk Sharpless's, co-writing history, it's not great. Dracula Untold, 25% from the critics, 58% from the audience. Last Witch Hunter, 18% critics, 44% audience. Gods of Egypt, 14% critics, 37% audience. Morbius, 15% critics, 71% audience, because that movie became a different kind of thing. People, it was so bad, it became good, and I think people, as they watched it more when it got to streaming, and kind of they were able to have fun with it. And that's one of the things where this track record of these movies that Sony's making, they're not technically good, but they do enough stuff or have people who do performances. You get Tom Hardy acting his ass off. You get Matt Smith people said Morbius was worse than this Madame Web movie. I disagree. Morbius is at least trying to do comic book type things. It had some cool visuals, and at the very, very, very least, Matt Smith is putting on a hell of a performance as the villain, where the guy here playing Ezekiel Sims is putting in one of the worst performances I've ever seen of anybody ever as a villain in a movie. So, I mean, you got that, and then Madame Web obviously sitting at a 13%, a 56% audience score. The only movie from these guys that doesn't have completely terrible review statuses. Power Rangers had a 51% and a 65%. However, John Gattens is the lead writer on that one, who did Coach Carter, Flight, and Kong Skull Island. I think that's why that movie worked a little bit better. But these guys, I don't think their goal is to produce phenomenal scripts. I think they're being asked to come in from a studio, do stuff quick, get it on a page, get it out the door, and this is what you end up with. And that's the type of stuff where if you're Sony and you're making these types of movies, you have to make sure that you're bringing people who are invested, who feel like they give a shit. And that's the problem. The writing is so bad that the actors can only do so much, and at times it doesn't feel like they care. The editing at times is so bad. And the lack of awareness in the world you're working in, that I feel like you're getting bad stuff coming off of the director's side. That, like, they don't care about this stuff the way that their fan base will care about this stuff. The ADR, this is the thing that pissed me off the most about this movie. You have a villain who's already not very good. I'm pretty sure 95% of his lines were recorded after filming wrapped. ADR is one of these things where you come in with audio for dialogue, and I don't know if it is audio dialogue restoration. I could be wrong. But basically, sometimes when you're on set, the director has to say things. There's other noises or stuff, so you're not getting clean audio, and then you go back into a studio and you re-record that audio while watching it. There's a great video of Hugh Jackman doing this for, I believe, Logan, where he's like, ha! He's kind of like doing all the emotions in like a small space to just re-record the audio. Every time Zeke's mouth is moving in this movie, the words do not match. Like, more than 90% of his lines do not match, and at least twice he is either on camera, not moving, or walking and clearly not moving his lips, and full sentences are coming out. When that type of stuff is happening in a movie, the people who are working on it don't care. That's the vibe that puts off, right? It's very similar to what happened with Game of Thrones when you get coffee cups and water bottles showing up and all of a sudden the writing is getting sloppy. It feels like the people involved don't care. And that is something you can't have happen with a movie. And for me, that's what happens here. So yes, could people have been trying to do their best? Sure. Doing the best with what you got? Yeah. Could the studio have been involved? Sure. But at the end of the day, the people who are actively putting together what is going to end up on the big screen for people, you gotta just do a better job of trying to elevate the material or make it engaging enough where it's like, okay, we can't do action. How can we make this more of a psychological thriller or something like that? But you never touch into any of those places, and this movie just ends up falling so flat. And it's just not good. So we have the Sea Maniacs up. I've talked at length. The score I'm going for this one is a 1 out of 5. It's hard to make a movie. A movie gets seen by the public. Somebody did something right somewhere. And, you know, it's missing the comic book type elements, either whether it's action or just the story. It's not connected to its material in a way that makes you feel like the people involved understand that material. And yeah, man, at the end of the day, it's just lazy writing, poor dialogue, actors who can only do so much, a director who, if they've been given a lot of hurdles, having trouble getting over those hurdles, isn't making sure the movie is engaging. And then the editing in the movie itself is just not great. This movie feels like it was chopped up, and then you get stuff like the ADR for Ezekiel Sims, and you're just like, I don't know. I don't know how a movie like that gets made. So yeah, I don't like talking negatively about a movie, but this is one I felt like I needed to get off my chest. Now I have. Now I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to flip it over to you guys. Have you guys seen Madam Web? If you fall into that audience that enjoyed the movie, I apologize if I've angered you while you're watching this, but I'm literally just trying to point out technical things that don't work in the movie. And if it did work for you, what worked? What was working? Help me see it, man, because I usually can find good things, and it was hard to find good things in this one. So let me know if you enjoyed it, what was working, what were elements that you wish could have been expanded on, or maybe could have made the movie pop a little bit more. And if you're on the side of the fence like myself, where this movie wasn't working for you, let's not trash it to trash it, but what wasn't technically working in the movie? What were you bumping up against? What made this not engaging? That was the other thing too. All the humor in this movie falls flat. I didn't laugh once, not even at the bad jokes. And there's one thing where they like flip flop the iconic, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, or it's like with responsibility you can have power, or something like they said. And Dakota Johnson says it twice, and both times I was just like, what are we trying to do? And it doesn't even say it in front of Ben, where it could have been like a thing where it's like later on, it's like, oh, Ben heard that, but like twisted it to make more sense for, you know, like, I don't know, man. There's just less that doesn't technically work. So what didn't technically work for you? Good, bad, indifferent, but keep it respectful. I'm Madam Web. Put it down below in the comments. I look forward to talking to you down there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with the C-Man anytime, we're talking movies, TV, trailer, reactions. You want to be here for any of our other coverage or things that we're doing. I got a lot of stuff I got to start working on that's like backlogged, catching up since the laptop, situation has fixed itself. So you want to be here for that. You want to show a little love and support the old C-Man. Well, hey, come join C-Maniac Nation. Super easy. Jump over there, hit that subscribe, hit that little bell if you want those alerts. And until next time, for the C-Man's Cinema Sit Down, I've been the C-Man. I'm signing off. Peace. Hey, what's up, C-Maniac Nation? Winter Ken here, where we grow out our roots and our beard, letting you know that you can see some new C-Man videos right up here and right down here. And if you want all those videos and show that man a little love and support, come join C-Maniac Nation right over there, and the C-Man will catch you on the next one.